putting this on fucking record. Oh my god. I'm getting clowned.
Oh, that's so fucking funny. She's totally gonna bring this up when we come back from reading break.
No, Karen.
Fucking hilarious.
Fuck. Damn it. Gabe, do you know the context of what we're talking about, or do you think we're just fucking crazy?
I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm assuming one of your professors called you up because you jumped out of class.
Being transcended.
Kind of. So, Brooke and I are in a creative nonfiction class, and on Monday, I was speaking, and while I was speaking, my internet decided, yeah, fuck you, Dean. So it started cutting me in and out, and because of that, the entire fucking class started clowning on me. Like,
oh no.
If not specifically for Taylor and Brooke, I'm pretty sure it was everybody. I hate it here.
I don't know what it is. You just make yourself a very easy target for bullying.
I know. I also think I can also take it. Like, I know
that's the issue.
Yeah, I know you guys think. Yeah, I know you guys think. I know you guys mean it in good fun.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not actually bullying you.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I mean, but
yeah. Wait, when's the point you've actually bullied me?
Dean, I'm always bullying.
Oh. They're an important part of people's breakfast.
Here's the thing about sex in fiction. You don't need to have a fucking sex scene.
I can't stand those books. They make me so mad.
I can't replace a fire alarm on my own.
Sing your morning routine.
Lemonade across my bed.
An unexpected pregnancy. Now David just...
It's like, who's your mommy?
Hello, everybody. My name is Dean, and welcome back to the InkGuild Podcast. Tonight, I'm joined by Brooke.
Hola.
And Gabe.
Hey.
Tonight, we're going to be talking about giving and receiving criticism. If you were familiar with the personal anxieties episode we did last season, how tonight is going to work is there isn't really a set structure to everything. We do have topics that we're going to be discussing, but I don't really have any prepared questions. It'll more or less just be follow-ups on the whim. So I think with that kind of as the general guideline, we do have set topics that we'll be kind of going through. So the first half of this episode will be criticism towards ourselves, and I mean that as in, how we individually receive give criticism, receive criticism towards our creative stuff, and I think as well as a friend group, because we are all creative writers, and I think especially because we all took a class together technically that encouraged giving and receiving criticism. That will be the first half of this episode. The second half will be more or less criticism towards other people. So criticism towards different authors, writing styles, techniques, whatever. Again, it's going to be completely loose and on the fly, so who knows what we'll be talking about tonight. But I think before we get to that, we didn't do a check-in last episode because that is the Sarah J. Maas episode. There was a lot to talk about there, so we didn't end up doing the check-in, but let's do it now. So I guess I'll go first. I've been working a lot on Xeno again lately, and I've put it in the chat, or I've put it in our Discord, guys, that like, hey, I'm not doing rewrites anymore, so I'm finally progressing the story again. I think on top of that, it's just been like a few poems here and there. I've been kind of getting better at a certain form of poetry, but I can elaborate more on that later. Excuse me. Brooke, how about you? Anything you've been working on lately?
Not anything big, just like random snippets here and there have popped into my head. Like I'll have a random scene of dialogue pop into my head and I'll write it down and think about it, or just have like a random burst of inspiration, write that down. put it away. Just been basically stockpiling a hoard to go through later when I have more time.
Mm-hmm. How goes the novel that you said you were working on?
Well, I just don't have time to work on it.
All right, I respect that. Gabe, how is Lemonheart going?
Lemonheart's going okay. I'm a little bit behind like my current schedule, but I'm just still trucking on, still just trying to push through and just get my quota done for the month.
Mm-hmm. And you've still been working exclusively on Lemonheart. You haven't been kind of deviating a little bit, or?
Yeah, I've been. I mean, I deviated a little bit for like a short story I was working on, but then I sort of dropped that, and now I'm just going back to Lemonheart full time.
Nice. So that was the check-in with three of us. And I think with that out of the way, let's now get into the first half of tonight, which is criticism towards or criticism within ourselves. And to start, I think we can just talk about like how we individually receive criticism. Personally, I think I've gotten a little bit better at it through the creative writing classes that we're familiar with, guys. It used to be that it used to be that throughout high school and some parts of junior high when I was first starting to write anyway, I could take criticism, but then again, like it was the kind of criticism that was coming from people that didn't know how to give creative writing criticism. And I know that that's like a really long sentence, but basically like the people that I was getting criticism from wasn't really what I needed to hear. So naturally, I was taking it all in anyway and thinking, okay, I could probably do this and that, but it wasn't working. So come the creative writing workshops, I knew I had some, or I needed to like be able to take as much criticism as possible because this is something that I really do care about, right? And I think through multiple workshops and through a lot of honesty, I think that's like it's really helped me improve like what like how I take in comments. Like I've been praised for a lot of things, I've been criticized for a lot of things, and ultimately I can take most of it. I think the only times that I can't take criticism properly is when it's very half-assed or if there isn't any kind of substance to it. So like if they're just saying if they're just like, hey, I like this a lot or I don't like this a lot, and I'm at the point where I'm asking, okay, but why? You know what I mean? Like you want to understand what exactly you're doing right and what you're doing wrong, and being met with nothing is kind of bothering. I don't know what do you guys think on that?
I mean, yeah, a part of me is like I want more like in-depth criticism, but then a part of me is like I don't know. I think it depends from person to person. I think like there are instances where I'm like I do get it. Like not everyone has like the time to like really go in depth on their feelings towards my work, and it's like, and I'm like I totally get that. And plus there's also just like there's like an inherent like I don't know, kind of awkwardness to it. I think that like especially if it's someone that you know personally, and like I've dealt with that when I'm both like giving and receiving criticism. It's like if it's someone whose work I know, or if it's someone who knows me, then there's always like a little bit of like, okay, like how harsh should I be? Like if it's there's something that I really don't like, then I'm probably not gonna like be as like harsh about it as I normally would, which is like it's sort of like a dampener, because I know that I probably should be if it's something that's like really I don't know I don't know what the word would be, but like just
bias?
Problematic, maybe yeah. Like I feel like I feel like when it's with people who know you well, then there's like there's like a certain type of criticism that I feel like you should like, if someone just comes out and outright says something is bad, then like I'll usually like interpret that as like, okay, maybe that's like I just need to cut it whole cloth. And usually if someone goes more in depth, then I'm like, okay, so that means there's like a good idea, but I need to like tweak it, which is like that's majorly what I did with Lemonheart, because I remember when I was running it through the workshops, a lot of the big criticisms that I got on it were like that Dune as a character was sort of one dimensional, and that like I sort of felt that because I had honed in on the idea of like him being this sort of crazy raunchy character, but I'd done that so much that he'd sort of become a caricature and he didn't really have any depth to him, and so the criticism I got was that he needs to like, is that the as wacky of a premise as it is, it needs to like evolve from there. It needs to actually go somewhere, and his motivations need to change over time. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. And then I did that.
Yeah. All right. So listening in, I think there's a couple angles that we can explore, but I think Brooke, I'll touch in with you first. Any initial thoughts on the topic?
Very awkward. I'm mind blank right now. I don't know.
All right.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Do you want me to come back to you?
Yeah, later.
Okay. All right. So, Gabe, you had you had kind of mentioned bias, or at least that's what you were kind of getting at. To pose the question, do you guys feel like bias influences a lot of the criticism you receive and give? Because to answer that question first, I definitely think it does. Like, in the beginning, when I first started getting to know everybody and when I was first starting to read everyone's work, that I didn't establish personal connections with you guys yet, but like, then I could be a little bit more objective with the sentence structure, with the jargon, with the style of your guys' stuff. But I think over time, as I was more familiar with, Gabe with your writing, or with Alex's writing, Brooke with your writing, it's just been I don't want to say it's been harder for me to be objective, because in that regard, like, I'm still trying to be as objective as possible, but like, when you've become friends with said person, it's kind of like how much of their how much do you really want to point out, right? Because I'm pretty sure like all of us do have pretty thick skin when it comes to criticism, especially because we're all familiar with how we write. But I think, yeah, there's still some inherent bias there.
I mean, yeah, I definitely do have a bias towards like stylistic choices, I guess. Like, there's been a lot of instances where like I'll receive criticism on a certain aspect of a story that I've written, and like my personal belief with criticism is that like all criticism has to be valid, and you have to at least take it apart, because like whether or not you really like agree with it or disagree with it, it's still an opinion that's being presented on your story, and that's like how someone took your story. So ultimately, it's kind of incumbent upon you to like internalize that, and whether or not you allow it to like actually influence your story, that's a whole other thing. But like if someone gives you an opinion on your story, then you have to internalize and be like, okay, that is an opinion on the story. That is how someone is coming at my story. How am I going to let that like affect me as a writer? Am I going to change the story based on that, or am I going to like so like I feel like with bias, I definitely do have like a bias in terms of like stylistic choices, like I said. Like, so if someone gives a critique on my story that's based on like something that I feel like is a stylistic choice, I probably won't change it, but like it's still something that I'll definitely take in. But like, and I've had that a lot before, like with some of my weirder stories, where like I'll be like, okay, I'm writing it down, I'm getting it down, but I'm probably not going to change it. Like ultimately.
Yeah, style, I think, kind of really depends, especially when I think you've developed your style, like, or at least you've found one that you're really comfortable with. Like for me, I've found kind of a style. Like I know how I think, I know how I write action scenes, I know how I write dialogue, but I'm still not concrete on the certain style yet. Like I cannot definitively describe my style in one sentence. It's just going to be all over the place.
Oh yeah.
So I think when it comes to bias when like when I have people like look over my work and they comment on, you know, me writing the action scenes and me writing dialogue and they're praising it, then I'm like, sweet. It probably means that not just the ideas are working, but like my style is influencing it and making it better. But at the same time, maybe I don't know if it's working. Like maybe it's just because maybe it's just, who knows if it's really working or not. Right? Like just because the style, like just because I know what my style is and I know that it's working for me, that doesn't mean it'll work probably in the long term. I guess if that makes any sense. It's more like like people are content with it right now, but I worry that is it going to work eventually or later on? Yeah, because style changes over time, right? Or like you develop your style through experience and through doing it a lot more. Brooke, anything? Or do you just want me to stop picking on you?
I'm here to partake, so I will partake. Yeah, bias. It can be hard because, like, at times I feel like I put so much of myself into it that it's my baby, and I don't want anyone to talk about my baby badly. Because it's either like it's just my baby and I made it, and I don't want anyone to talk badly about it, or it feels like it's a direct attack on me. Because it's like, this is me, this is my work. I put myself into this. How dare you say anything bad about me? So it's like that God complex coming out just a little bit. I'm like, no, you're wrong. This is perfect. But that's just because I work hard on it and I like it. But then at the same time, it's like you bring it forward for others to look at because you know that you could improve on something. And it was definitely something I struggled with at the beginning when I first joined creative writing class, was actually having people really look at my work more than just people being interested in it and like actually wanting to help me improve. And it was hard at first, like just taking in the comments and trying not to take them personally. But then it just got like easier the more it happened. I mean, it's like not easy now still, because it's still, this is mine. Don't talk down to it. But I'm getting better. Like sometimes I'm still kind of like, what do you know? I know, exactly. Also, it's really hard with like Gabe and I because we have like chapters. I guess you too. Like when you just bring just a small piece of a big work in, and then people are questioning like so many things. You're like, wait, hold on, this isn't the whole story.
Oh yeah.
Like I felt a lot of struggle when I was bringing in my very short clippings from my chapters for everyone to look at, because it was like there's not enough of the rest of the story to understand some things, and then people would start asking about pieces that would be in other parts of the story. It's like, it's there, it's just not here. I just wanted you to look at the dialogue right here. Don't think about the rest of it. Don't even think. Just look at this right here. The words they say, just that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, context.
So that was hard.
Thing. Yeah, context is huge. It's so thing. As I can definitely agree with you, because you know my book is not just one giant chapter, Brooke. But anyway, yeah. I've definitely struggled with like how much of this do I include, especially for for the classes that we were doing. Like we were given as much, not obviously like don't overload the class with like your whole fucking book, but 10 pages probably, that's fine, I think. But even if you're gonna go like 3 to 5 pages, how much of it do you really want? Because how much of it do you want critiqued? Because you are considering just a small portion of it. So like how much context do you need to fill in, and will this context kind of influence everyone's decision to like, okay, we were caught up to speed, or maybe I might still need some more something. Maybe it might still need some more things. And I think that is huge for, I think, just like receiving comments, because obviously, yeah, you're right. Like, you know, it's just a small portion of it. So like you might get the action dialogue, or you might get the action critiqued, you might get the dialogue critiqued, but like, will this now suddenly apply to everything that has been said throughout the rest of the chapter? Is that making any, like, are you guys following with me on that? Like, you know, context is important.
Oh yeah. I've never like submitted I don't think I ever submitted anything that was like necessarily out of context, but I always submitted like chapters that were one after the other. Actually, no, I have submitted stuff out of context, and I know that because when I got to the point where I was submitting my third chapter to the workshop, that was like, by that point I had already gone back and I had like changed the entire story prior to that. So, and then I was writing from that perspective, which that is kind of like on me in terms of that, because like that led to a lot of confusion with like certain dialogue bits when I was workshopping, because like characters would make a reference to like an event or another character, and then during the workshop, some of the criticism I would get would be like, when did this happen, or what is he talking about? And I would have to basically be like, oh yeah, I've already changed that. I didn't. I'm submitting this out of context. And there was like so it was always a little awkward having to answer that.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, I've submitted in both whole chapters and fragments. So I remember one of my earliest workshops, I submitted in a point in my book that was around chapter 12 now, and taken out of context, there was so much I needed to explain before going into it that I'm realizing, okay, yeah, maybe I should have just included in like another chapter or something, or maybe I could have better explained the context, because ultimately there were a lot more points of criticism that I needed to account for, and that wasn't really a bad thing. Like, it was all helpful considering it, but I think, you know, there was still the part in my head that was like, man, you should have included like the whole rest of the chapter, or like explain the context a bit better, like I said, because maybe that would have changed opinion.
Mm-hmm.
How about thing? So we were touching on bias, and yeah, so we were touching on bias. How is it that, like, because I'm like even out of podcast, I was always genuinely curious, like, how is it that like us becoming friends is kind of influenced getting, or like giving, or like receiving the criticism that we make? Because obviously at one point all of us didn't really know each other, right? And once we did, and once we got familiar with our writing styles, has that really changed how we see our respective writing? Because I think it definitely does, for me at least. Like, because I'm friends with the two of you, I will almost always walk in with some bias there, like you know, for the better. Like, I know how capable you guys are of writing, but at a very neutral stance, I know what your styles are. So I kind of already know how you're approaching an action scene, or how you're approaching dialogue, or how you're approaching exposition. Like, I already have a feeling as to how you're going into it. So then at that point it feels like I'm right. So then at that point it feels like I'm giving criticism based off of what I know, based off of what you guys have written. And I think that I think that helps, because then it's like, okay, here is not just objective criticism, but you know, the kind of criticism that like is working toward your style. But I don't know really if that is like beneficial to you guys. Like, what do you guys think?
I think I definitely do have biases in terms of like critiquing people whose writing I'm familiar with. Like, every time I read a Xeno chapter, I'm not going to critique it like, I mean, like, you know me, I don't particularly love YA fiction, and Xeno is YA fiction. So, like, if I go into it, I'm not going to be like, why is this YA fiction? I don't like that. You should change it because I don't like it. Because, like, I'm not going to be a dick. I obviously know what your style is, and I know that, like, that's more of like that's just a personal preference. It's just like it's just not the type of book that I would like normally get into. But so there's an air of like I'm critiquing this from like a professional perspective and not like a how I would read it, because I just know like I just don't, because I've never read. I mean, I tried reading Throne of Glass. I didn't really like that. I haven't read any. I think the last YA fiction I read was Hunger Games. I don't even remember if I really liked that. It's just not like it's not my cup of tea. But that's like that's a personal bias. That's not an objective thing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And like I sort of feel that like the reversal. Like I know that my writing is like weird. I'm not gonna say like I don't want to say like anything like I don't want to blow smoke up my own ass. I'm not gonna say like I'm like a unique writer, but I just know that I'm like my writing is like just like the characters are just off. Everything's a little off, and it's like so. I always know there's gonna be like an air of like it's just like a little too out there for some people. Which I at this point I'm just used to that. I always know that like the people who like my writing, I know are going to like it, and like I know there are people who are just not going to like it because it's just very weird, and like I sort of write things from the perspective of no one's telling me no, I can't do this, so I'm just gonna fucking do it.
Mm-hmm.
With every individual plot point.
Yeah. Brooke, any thoughts on bias?
Yeah. What came to mind immediately was like I heard so much about Brett's writing before I even read any of her writing. I just heard that she was so good and that even Micheline was looking forward to reading more of it. And I was like, well, crap, this is a really good writer, so I cannot critique. Like I went into it thinking like I am too unknowledgeable. I am not worthy of critiquing her masterpieces. So sometimes I go into it like not even just friend. I don't critique on friend. I go in thinking, oh, this person is so good. What am I going to offer them?
Oh my god, you bring up such a good point. Favoritism. Yeah. I think I'm gonna tread lightly here because we do have friends outside of this podcast that I don't think necessarily would want their name dropped. But yeah, it is so obvious that I think some of us, if not all of us, have been either influenced or been influenced by favoritism. And that's in some way that I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Like you certainly should commend people who are like very strong writers, but I think with that comes a lot of insecurity about like oneself and like one's own writing, right? Like I'm willing to admit that like my writing hasn't always been perfect, and to some degree like it's kind of in the middle. Like some people kind of really like it, some people really have issues with it. But I've been told before that that the comments that I give in terms of the comments that I give in terms of like critiquing stories, like the insight that I offer people, like that, I've been told that like that's really good and they really appreciate that they really like that about me. So I guess how that necessarily plays into favoritism is like that certainly puts some kind of weird expectation on me to like constantly, or not constantly, but like consistently deliver good feedback, which I can do sometimes, but sometimes I can't do. Like in my in a poetry class that I'm taking this semester, I am still really trying to understand a lot of what good poetry is, or like how it brings out a lot in or thing, like just how different giving poetry critique is. And as someone who has been known to give quality feedback, like I've certainly put that on myself to be like, okay, here's the kind of good insight that I can typically provide. But I don't know, I just feel like I'm so out of my element when I can't do it. it's like if you've been like, I think playing on like, I think favoritism is kind of like a two-way thing. Like, it's certainly nice to be a favorite and certainly nice to be appreciated for the kind of writing you do, but for some reason it feels like there's some kind of expectation when you're a favorite. Or is that just me?
No, I understand how you feel, but like it's sort of weird for me because I didn't. It's actually sort of funny. I wasn't aware that I was anyone's favorite until like a couple months ago. I was hanging out with you guys like IRL, and a couple of you informed me that I was our professor's favorite, and I was just like, what? What do you mean? And then I sort of got this look like, what are you being fucking serious? Do you not know? And I was like, no. What do you mean? And then like going forward when we went into the next class, I was like, I'm not her favorite. There's no way I'm not her favorite. And then when we got to my story, I remember like when it happened, I was like, I leaned back in my chair. I was like, okay, because I remember I gave my workshop piece, and then before we did my workshop, I remember she pulled up a video essay on like needs and wants in character writing, which is something I had never seen her do for a workshop before. So I was like, and that definitely like put a weird damper on my writing, because I was like, okay, I for the first time I was like, I have like an expectation on me now that I didn't know that I didn't even think that I had before, so it was sort of weird.
Yeah. It felt like you had to live up to, or it felt like you had to, how am I trying to say this? It felt like there was now a goal for you to try to like reach.
Yeah.
Like a brass ring kind of thing.
Yeah, sort of. It was just like once I sort of got to that point, I was like, okay, now that I sort of see this, what it is, I'm like, okay, I can't fuck this up now. Like, I don't know. I have like an expectation on me now, so I can't fuck up now. If I fuck up now, it'd be fucked up.
Yeah. I agree. Like I've been like for some of the things that I've been given praise towards that is now an expectation that I have to reach. Like I've been told that like my imagery has been pretty good with my book, and so suddenly I have to make sure that the imagery throughout my book is really, really, really good. And that can be hard to do that, especially I think because I'm coming out of rewrites and working exclusively on, or I'm now working on towards or the main story or the rest of the story. So it's like, oh fuck, I have to come up with new images. But even then, like sentence variety or like sentence structure, action, dialogue, these are things that I have said towards other people, and for some reason that kind of, I don't want to say it's kind of like a weird reverse favoritism thing, but it's kind of like this is the expectation that now I'm setting out by giving you said point of critique. I feel like I have to back it up too. Do you know what I mean? Like if I comment on if I comment on the importance of your protagonist, like subconsciously I'm thinking, okay, my protagonist now has to be really, really, really important too.
Yeah, I've definitely felt that. Especially in workshops. Like if I know that I like if I give like a harsh criticism on something, or not even a harsh criticism, just any criticism on something, like any aspect of a story, like in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, fuck, now I definitely can't fuck that aspect up in my next workshop, or else I'm gonna look like such a fucking dickhead. Like,
yeah,
I don't want to be that guy who's like, character depth, blah blah blah, grammar, blah blah blah, storytelling, blah blah blah, and then like just completely drop the ball on my next workshop, which inevitably I will feel like I've done anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just like that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, it always just like makes me a little nervous that I've just like made myself a total hypocrite in my critique.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I struggled with going into workshops. It's just I felt like I couldn't critique anything because I knew that I was still struggling with my own writing, and I was like, I can't say anything. I am not an example of this. Like, honestly, most of my critiquing wasn't critiquing. It was just like pointing out the good parts. It was like, yeah, do this more. I like that. That's good. Instead of being like, don't do that, because I do all that stuff too. Don't do that. But I do that.
Yeah. See, like you also like bringing a praise is also a really good thing, right? As objective criticism is important, right? Like objectivity means also giving praise, right? Like despite how many people that I've been with through workshop being like, tear this apart and shit, like I personally try to find just as many good things, if not more good things than critique. I was about to say negative things, but that's putting it in a bad light. I'm thinking like,
yeah,
for every point of criticism that I find, I at least try to find 2 positive things, because we all go into, or thing, like, I can't speak for everybody, but certainly there's an air of like going into these workshops like with a piece of writing that you just really do not like, and expecting people to rightfully point out what is making it wrong so you can make it better. But at the same time, when you're walking in expecting your piece to be pretty much eviscerated, you kind of lose track of like what you do right.
That's why I didn't feel too bad about not really giving like constructive pointers, instead just doing the praise. Is like, I loved getting feedback and seeing all the comments, like, because it was very helpful to get the comments saying like, I liked this part. I'm like, great, I can keep that in, I can do more of that, perfect. So I tried to do the exact same thing, be like, I didn't care that I wasn't giving like, don't put this adjective here, get rid of your eyes at the beginning of the sentence, instead of just being like, I like this image right here, I like the way she said this word. It's just nice.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, without positive critique, I
want to say that I'm not just being nice, though. I don't want to give that image that it's just being nice to be nice. Like, no.
Yeah. Sorry if I spoke too soon and didn't let you finish your point.
I just wanted to make sure that I'm not saying that I'm just being nice to be nice. I was.
Yeah.
Still trying to do the thing.
I'm following along with you. I'm pretty sure Gabe is also following along with you. I don't know about the general audience though, but like, I think,
thanks, Dean.
Yeah, I think as I was saying, without the positive critique, we probably would never have known what we were doing right in the first place. Like, I certainly wouldn't know that my imagery was a strength, or like my character relationships was a strength that I was doing, had I not been praised for it. Gabe, I can't speak for you, but I'm pretty sure like if you didn't have a bunch of people going, holy fuck, what the hell is going on in your stories, it's like you would have never known that, like, maybe I can keep doing that.
Yeah, basically. A big positive critique that I got with Lemonheart, aside from like humor, I guess, was world building, because in the 3rd chapter that I submitted, I sort of started introducing some like the actual aspects of the post-apocalyptic world that Dune lives in, and I just what started as like, I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna throw in like tiny tidbits here. Like I didn't want to like do a major like Fallout style post-apocalyptic setting, where it's like basically a completely new world, but just like I was just basically gonna do like a it's the real world, but like with tiny little tweaks. So like I started out with like, there's stuff like there's certain technology differences. Like the big imagery piece in that chapter was like, there's a giant mecha sticking out of a building, which obviously doesn't actually exist, but as I was writing that was just an aspect of like World War III that I didn't want to like I didn't know what I wanted to do with. I just wanted to have that. And there was like a bunch of USSR imagery, which was like hinting that the USSR hadn't disbanded, and there was like some alternate history stuff going on. But I didn't want to. But then when I did the workshop, it turned out that everyone really liked that, and everyone really enjoyed like the world being built through like these tiny little aspects. And I was like, okay, wait, hang on, maybe there's something more to this. Maybe I can actually do a Fallout y setting where it's like a post-apocalyptic, but it's also like not clearly like not our world either.
Right. Brooke, how are you on receiving positive critique? Because you've given your stance on giving it, but like how is it on receiving it?
Yeah, well, like I said, I really enjoyed getting the positive because I did have a lot of negative critique. Well, not adjusting critiques, because obviously
You could just say critique. Because I'm pretty sure a lot of people don't mean ill will unless
yeah,
you've
when we're
had a bad
talking, like,
encounter.
yeah, but we're talking about like the positive critique right now. Like this is
Yeah.
a good part kind of thing. So there was like a lot of adjusting critiques, I'm just gonna call it, where they like try and fix, I don't know, sentence structure or something like that. Because that's fine. But then every now and then someone would be like, I like this interaction. I like this little motion they did. And I'd be like, great, I like that. And I don't know, those actually were the parts that would stick out to me the most when I was reading feedback. Like obviously I would jot down and immediately fix things that were more structural or something like that. But things that people pointed out were mostly like the feel, like the personality, I guess, of the stories that I did.
Mm-hmm.
They'd point out like this is what makes it feel more real, and I'd be like, great, cool, I'll add more of that. And it's nice.
Yeah.
It was always very nice. Yeah, I do. I feel like you just have to have those balances of the good and the harsher.
A real quick thing actually, like you were mentioning personality, and I'm remembering on the Discord you had sent, I think you had sent one of your submission pieces. I think it was called Double Mission, right?
Oh, I didn't name anything like that.
Okay, well, I don't think I'm
Not me.
Huh?
So that wasn't me.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know if it was you or not, but like I'm gonna pull up the pin messages. It's second submission revision, edit, or ODT, something.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I remember that.
I don't know.
All right. Well, I remember that, and I really like that. Like you did have like a lot of personality to your thing. And I'm like, when you were saying personality, I'm like, yeah, Brooke's piece does have a lot of like, you really do put in a lot of like really like good imagery, and I think like dialogue is what you do really well too. Like you like through signifiers and through word choice, like your dialogue is like really engaging.
That's a controversial point.
Well, I like it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Not everyone does.
Yeah.
That's one of the other things. It's like things have mixed points. I feel like there was one time there was like, one workshop. It felt like half of the class was just split into 50-50s. Like half the workshop really liked it and the other half was like, nah. Like that happens sometimes. And then it just boils down to what you think works the best for your story. But sometimes it can be really controversial. Like some people hate it, some people love it.
Mm-hmm.
And you just got to decide if that's a thing that you're comfortable with your piece giving off, you know?
Yeah.
And that can be hard.
Mm-hmm.
I think it just like how it influences your style, like, or how it'll benefit your style really. Like, I know I've been selective with the comments that I've given, like, compared to my first creative writing workshop. I remember there were maybe like 18, 20 people in that class, and only really for when I workshopped Xeno for the first time, I think I only considered 6 of those. Like overall, like there were a few smaller things here and there, but like ultimately it was the 6 marked documents that I ended up choosing that would like be most beneficial to me. And you know, when I was in subsequent creative writing workshops, I think it's largely been the same thing. Like, obviously I'm considering everyone's comments as much as possible, but really there are just some that, like, okay, this makes sense to how I'm going to like this is the one that like would make sense in the direction that I'm going towards, be it, towards critique or towards praise. So this is the one I ultimately end up sticking with. That makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think yeah, let's just start closing off this section, because there isn't really much else I can really talk about. I think, what the hell else am I trying to add on to here? I think we kind of touched on everything, really. Like, if there's anything more, then we can do a follow-up, but like I'm thinking, like, largely when it comes to our own personal critiques, for everyone who is listening, it is still, at the end of the day, we are still creative writers, and like how we handle our things, like as friends and as creative writers, it certainly helps bring out a lot in our stories. And I think that's been a valuable lesson, I think, for me moving forward. Like, I've said this before numerous times, but it's been so nice having people who can like properly vet my story. Right. And by properly vet, I mean like they understand they understand marking, marking syntax, marking passive verbs, marking if there's too much jargon or if there's too much world building, like they understand what all of that means more so than I think any other person in my life has. So yeah. I guess as a final close off for this section on my end, at least, find people you like work, or find people who know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's the end of part 1. And for part 2, so
sorry, I cut out for a second. Can you repeat that?
Well, no, I was just kind of closing off the, like, I'm pretty sure you're familiar with like how many times I've said, having creative writing friends is great because we all know what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you want to add to that, or?
No, I think I have more thoughts on like receiving criticism than giving criticism. So yeah, I think our own critiques I'm like solid on.
Yeah. Brooke, anything on or any final things on like part 1? So like,
not that I can think of off the top of my head.
all right. Well, then I guess we can just move into part 2 now, which is, I guess, critiquing other authors. And this is kind of critiquing people outside of our bubble. And, granted, just for transparency's sake, I don't have anything creative published, and I'd like to get things creatively published. So that's for the sake of transparency on that end. I don't know if you guys have got anything creatively published. Like, have you guys got anything published on a magazine?
Hell no.
No.
All right, so that's kind of where we're all at, just for clarity's sake. That being said, there are a lot of things, I think, in terms of like giving and receiving criticism towards authors outside of our bubble. I think especially big authors that are important. And I think for one thing, I didn't get to touch on this in the Sarah J. Maas episode, and likely we will touch on it soon, but I don't think writers should be ever content. And I mean that as in, I don't think that your name value alone should be the reason why you're selling books. Like, I think, or I would want to be the kind of author personally that continuously improves not just their style, but like their own personal level of achievement. And I don't want my books to ever just be sold on my name value alone. I want to continuously be improving, and I want to make sure that like I'm putting out good product as much as I can. Like I don't ever want my name to just be the reason why people are picking up my books, right? So I guess name value, let's talk about that.
I mean, like if we're talking about name value, like there are certain authors who have definitely like and not even just authors, just like creatives who have just let status go to their head a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Like J.K. Rowling, very obvious example. I don't know what happened, but like she's very clearly gone off some kind of deep end and like has let like the status of being the creator of Harry Potter like kind of get to her head a little bit, and now it's like she's like untouchable almost. Like she threatens to sue people who like critique her publicly, and she threatens to like she's on Twitter, she's constantly retweeting people who give her criticism like I'm going to sue you for slander, and it's like who the fuck do you think you are, dude? Like
yeah, honestly.
Like she's now using her platform to spew garbage, and so I think there's like a bunch of authors like that. That's just the most topical example. There's also like I think a very prominent field where this appears is like is movie writers and movie directors. Like maybe to like a less extent, but like M. Night Shyamalan comes to mind. Like he's definitely someone who like is for his early work, and then like it's very obvious that he let it get to his head, and now he has this sort of complex that he's like untouchable, and it leads to a lot of his movies sort of feeling like they're made by someone who thinks they know better, but because they are, and then they end up being really bad because he has like it's like a Dunning-Kruger effect. He's sort of bought his own hype about being like this M. Night Shyamalan, about this being like this like I remember he was called the next Steven Spielberg like back when Signs was coming out. I mean I don't remember that. I was a little fucking baby when Signs came up, but there's like magazines you can find and shit like that. That's like a really solid example I think of that, where it's like where you have someone whose hype sort of gets to their head and they start to buy into like being the next blah 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 and being the next whoever the fuck, and then they just make garbage because they stop self-critiquing and they stop listening to the opinions of others. And I know plenty of people like probably outside of this bubble definitely, who have had that effect happen long before they even get hype. They just I know I've told stories on this podcast about like back when I was more into movies, and I did like I had like movie review. I had like a movie review blog, and I had buddies who were like into filmmaking, and they would like ask me to critique their scripts. And I've told the story about like the one guy who I just had to like tell like I can't critique your writing anymore because you just don't fucking listen to me.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. I'll basically go through it again in case, because I don't remember what episode I talked about it in, and I wouldn't want someone to like go searching through the whole every single podcast to find this reference. But basically what it was is that I knew this guy who was like he was a indie filmmaker. I think he still does it. I don't know. I haven't stayed in touch with him at all. But basically like he would ask me to critique his scripts a lot, and every single fucking time without fail that I would give him a critique, and he would start like fighting me about it, and like he would get super defensive about it to the point where like he would start like insulting me about it. Like I remember this one time, like he gave me his script for a romantic comedy he was writing, and I told him that it took way too long into the story to like establish like introduce the two romantic leads in his romantic comedy, and he basically took that and said, well, you're just impatient. And I was just like, well, what the fuck did you want to hear my critique for if you're just not going to listen to them?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think,
especially because he's actively coming to you for that. Like, yikes.
Yeah, that was the most annoying part. Like he it's not like I went to his script and told him. He sent me his script and said, "Can you give me notes on this?" And I said, "Yes, I can." And he said, "Please don't hold back. I want to improve my writing." And I was like, "Sounds fucking good. Here are my critiques." And he said, "You're impatient." And I'm like, "What the fuck did you ask me for?"
I knew a guy who was like that too. I think largely he's gotten a little bit better, but it's been a while since I've come into contact with him. But basically, yeah, it's kind of like the same thing. So,
that wasn't even like my most honest criticism of his work. Like, that was me holding back.
Oh boy. So I think, yeah, God or superiority complexes can be really bothering.
And yeah, superior. Like, I think being an artist sort of lends itself. I mean, not automatically, but I think like people who have superiority complexes, like, will sort of gravitate towards art because, like, they'll either gravitate towards art or like a science because it's a field that sort of lets them like feel like they have a superiority over someone else, where it's like where there's a determinate skill. Like, you can't really do that in a business or like journalism, because journalism and business are like it's sort of different fields. You can't really lord over like your investing skills or like your journalistic ability. You can't lord that over someone if you have like that kind of complex.
Yeah, I agree. I think to quickly touch back on what you said about M. Night Shyamalan, like as you were talking about him, I remember like when Split came out, I had heard things that like apparently a lot of people were giving him praise that like, oh my god, it's one of his best movies in a while. And apparently
it was written 20 years ago.
Yeah, it was written like way before his current
he wrote it
movies.
It was supposed to be like a sequel to Unbreakable. He wrote it like right after he wrote Unbreakable, which IMHO, that's his best movie. But like he wrote that, and then he wrote Split, which was supposed to be a sequel. Then he just left Split on the back burner for 20 years. Then he made Split, and Split was fucking awesome. But it's not a coincidence it was awesome, because right after he made Glass, and Glass was a movie that he wrote like in his current M. Night Shyamalan mindset. And funnily enough, Glass was fucking terrible.
Yeah, so I've heard. Brooke,
Well, it speaks to the fact that like a lot of people have seen Split, but like very few have actually watched the following two movies. Or the following movie. Wait, following two. Was there two after Split, or was it just tying back to his Bruce Willis one?
I think there was just
Split,
Glass,
and then Glass. Yeah, there's only the three.
Most people haven't seen Glass, and Glass was awful. I don't actually know why. I like every time I think about it, I'm like, I sort of wish that Split had not connected to Unbreakable at the end, so that I could just not think about it and just enjoy Split for what it was.
You can. Just don't watch that last bit.
I've been quickly touching on that. Like, I've been told about the ending, and I'm like, oh, that's really cool. But then I remember not only was Glass written at M. Night Shyamalan's most superiority complex-esque, but like at Bruce Willis's most uncooperative. Well, not most uncooperative, but like he was, Bruce Willis, I think, had also had the kind of thing where it's like, I'm Bruce Willis.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's definitely an aspect to that where it's just like, if you're in enough Die Hard movies, then you're just like, hey, I'm the guy who did Die Hard, okay? So don't tell me what to fucking do.
Yeah.
And like, apparently, like, that happens with a lot of actors. I've heard that's like what happened with Fast and the Furious or something. Like, that's like Vin Diesel and The Rock got into it over that. I don't know who was Mad Dog and who there, but like, actors are a whole other field though, because like Hollywood is just a mess. I don't even know if we have enough time to get into that.
We don't.
We don't.
Because that's chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think going back to authors really quick then, in terms of superiority complexes, and I don't mean to call her out necessarily because I'm sure that she's like a very nice woman, but Sarah J. Maas really does have a very familiar writing style that I don't think has evolved too much in terms of the books. Like there's a noticeable difference in quality when it comes from Throne of Glass to A Court of Thorns and Roses, because objectively, there is a little bit more creative substance with A Court of Thorns and Roses, but at the same time, it's very obvious to tell when these are Sarah J. Maas books, and you can't really deviate away from that. Like I was expecting Crescent City, because it was branching out into adult fiction rather than just new adult or young adult fiction, that it was going to be more or less a really brand new experience, but ultimately it's still just a Sarah J. Maas book with swearing, and that doesn't really feel all that special. And again, I'm not trying to point out, I'm not trying to say that, because of what we were saying earlier, that Sarah J. Maas has a superiority complex, but like, I guess transitioning into a new topic, I think there is an overbearing sense of familiarity when it comes to certain authors where, like we'd been talking about, their name is so familiar that they don't really change much of their style, and they don't really try to innovate on new things, right? And obviously your style is your style, but at the same time, why not try to make things different? That way it doesn't stagnate.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Brooke, what's your take on that?
I don't know which point this ties into, but something that was in my head was like when authors try to pretend that they've done something. Like, she's just fucking in my head. J.K. fucking Rowling with her. This character was actually gay. This character was actually really black. This character was actually Jewish. It's like, you can't just say that after the fact. We know for a fact you wrote these with like everyone being just a regular straight white person, and just, like, don't do that after the fact. I don't like that. And they try to make themselves seem better than they are, or they'll just write a character in for the purpose of having that diversity, but then that character is just a flat character. Like, I can think about all of the freaking movies that come out on Netflix always have that usually overweight, black, very funky, fun character as the main character's best friend. And usually they get shat on. Mm-hmm. And then come back at the end without really any real apology made towards them. And it's just, I hate that when people are like, no, we're being diverse. We're including all these things. Look, we're making a change and we're being inclusive. And it's like, but you're not. And you're making the situation worse by saying that you are.
Are you alluding to a particular show? Because I don't, there isn't one that's clicking in my head.
Well, something that came to my head immediately was Tall Girl.
Oh, yeah.
She was just absolutely horrible to her best friend in that. And her best friend was definitely that stereotypical, I don't take no shit kind of gal. Very fun. And she was always hyping up Miss, I'm 6'1". Like, yeah. And I've freaking, That's So Raven actually kind of did the reverse, because I don't remember her name. Was her name Harper? No, Harper was in Wizards of Waverly Place.
Wizards, yeah.
Yeah.
Are you thinking Chelsea?
Yeah, That's So Raven. Oh, Chelsea. Oh, yeah, it totally was, wasn't it? Yeah, Wizards. I can't say it. What am I saying? That's So Raven.
Breathe.
They had most of the black people, and then they had Chelsea on the side as the white character, which was great. And they even had that freaking episode where she went into a store with like a hat on, and they showed the differences between the way that Raven was being treated versus Chelsea, because it was a black versus white. That's great stuff. But then they usually just, like Tall Girl, would they just have the colored character on the side, and it's like, yee.
So
or just like like in All the Boys I Loved Before, they just have the random gay guy, and then the random gay guy becomes her best friend, and then the second movie he's there just for one scene so she can rant to him, and then he's like, I have problems too. I'm like the only gay guy in the school, and she's like, yeah. Anyway, my problems suck. And it's like, stop doing that.
Yeah. I think ultimately, like, we're talking, or I think, like, if we were to generalize what we're talking about, I think social conscience maybe that's the first thing that came into my head. Like, how are authors responding to, like, acknowledging more LGBTQIA plus dynamics, more BIPOC dynamics? Like, how are they responding to that? And that, I think, is definitely a point of criticism, because there are some authors that are doing it right and some authors that are doing it wrong. I think, like, in terms of creators, or, like, products, or, like, written works, the TV series She-Ra, which Alex and I have gone on about a couple times already, but, like, that is one that definitely should be praised. Like, there should be, like, there's been a lot of attention towards representing queer relationships really well, and that is something to think, that is something to acknowledge, and that is something to be, like, happy about, right? But in terms of criticism, like, Gabe, I think you were touching on J.K. Rowling, like, both of you were touching on J.K. Rowling, and, like, that is obviously a point of criticism, because that is, I think, one of the poorest responses to that. Like, changing canon and retconning characters because you want to fit into the social climate is wrong.
Yeah.
And I
Like,
think
it would be more meaningful if she just acknowledged that, like, she wrote her stories from a perspective that was 20 years old, and just changed how she writes going forward, not just, like, go back and change how her stories used to be. Just, like, it would be more meaningful to just say, like, hey, I wrote these stories in a period of time when, like, I didn't really know a lot of this stuff, but now I do, so I'm going to write with that mindset going forward. That's more meaningful than being like, oh, actually, this was always had representation. You just didn't know because I kept it a secret.
Yeah, you bring up such a good point, actually. How meaningful would it have been to have a new Hogwarts adventure with like,
I'm not even saying Hogwarts. I think she needs to. That's like. I think she needs to abandon Harry Potter. Like, I think she's latched on to Harry Potter too hard. I think if J.K. like, okay, here's the thing. She's made one of the most influential and iconic fantasy series that has ever been made. Whether or not you actually like Harry Potter, that's, like, irrelevant. Objectively speaking, she's made one of the most popular fantasy series of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe there's, like, a little bit, like, too much expectations, but, like, but if she made a new fantasy story and it contained, like, more representation, like, you would probably have a way more meaningful. It would be way more meaningful than, like, her just saying, like, oh, actually, all these characters in this story that I wrote 20 years ago, they were actually all very representative of contemporary topics. Also, I'm making a new story which involves a trans woman being a murderer for some reason. I'm totally woke, though.
Yeah, it would certainly, like, give a sense of, like, understanding if a lot, if not just authors like J.K. Rowling were acknowledging that, like, the mindset that you wrote the thing on. Like, obviously times are different, and if you acknowledge that involves a lot of transparency, and people are going to not rightfully, but they're going to be a lot more content with that. I think they're going to acknowledge that, like, given context, a lot of BIPOC and LGBTQIA plus voices were there, but certainly not as talked about as they are now.
Yeah.
Right. And now that we are talking about them more, we should be representing them more in storytelling. And I think if not just authors right now, but if authors moving forward are willing to acknowledge that, then they're going to build a good relationship with their audience, which I think is really important.
Yeah, and I say all that knowing that, like, that's a model that works because Rick Riordan basically did that. He went back and said, like, when I wrote Percy Jackson, it was from a mindset that was, like, 15 years ago. I wasn't aware of things that I'm aware now. And now in his future stories that he writes now, which might not be as popular as Percy Jackson because he hasn't latched on to a series that ended 10 years ago. Wink, wink, nod, nod. But, like, he's including. I mean, I've heard. I don't read Rick Riordan books. They're, like, I don't read them, but like I have heard that they have more representation now, and that's like it's like, okay, that's more meaningful. You've learned things and you've internalized them and applied it to your writing. That means a hell of a lot more than going back and saying, actually, this was good the entire time, and I don't need to work on anything.
Yeah. It feels like it feels, I guess, just kind of wrong going back and retconning a bunch of stories that you have already written, right? Like,
yeah, because like representation is a good thing. Like representation's a good thing, but no one's going back and saying that old media was like bigoted for not containing it, because we understand that like a movie that was made in like 20 years ago, or a book that was written 20 years ago, we understand it was written in a context where like people just didn't have like a vast understanding of certain topics. We didn't really understand a lot of things the way we do now, especially like with the internet, where we're so connected, we're able to like communicate so much more information, so we understand so much more things. But like what people get, that a book or a movie 20 years ago wasn't going to be made with that same context. So it's not like no one's saying like, oh, fucking Die Hard it's a problematic movie because it doesn't contain representation. Like, despite what conservatives will tell you, no one's actually saying that. So going back and saying like, oh, this character was actually gay the entire time, it's like, it doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't do anything. All you're saying is that all it shows is it just feels more like she's afraid of she's like imagining a fictional scenario of someone calling out her writing for not having representation. Like, she's more worried about that than she is about having representation in her news stories.
yeah. Brooke, anything to add? Or anything to elaborate on?
No, not particularly. I think Gabe has summed that up very well.
So I think another point of discussion when it comes to giving and receiving criticism, I think nowadays, on top of representation, is acknowledging mental health. I think that more than anything has to be a huge thing moving forward. And I think specifically what I was thinking about when we were talking is regarding content warnings. So trigger warnings in I think in stories moving forward. And I'm not exactly familiar with books that have been releasing content warnings for their things, but I feel like I don't know, I feel like it should be a thing in certain stories. I think particularly with I think with like heavier stories, like specifically ones that are dealing with like with suicide and depression, I think those should have content warnings. But like, yeah, I don't know. I think what my point is I think what I'm trying to get at with my point of like giving and receiving criticism in terms of mental health is to acknowledge that is also really important in terms of our current climate. Like, it's good that we are finally talking about things that we didn't understand mentally 20 years ago. So I think that could also be reflected in our fiction and in our nonfiction, obviously. But any thoughts on that? Or did I just like, I don't know. How are you guys on content warnings?
I mean, it's sort of tough for me because like there are certain obvious obvious topics that like you should have content warnings for, I feel like. But like where it gets like sort of tricky for me is that like a lot of those stories I just don't write about because I have firm rules that I'm just abiding to. I'm just never going to touch on those topics because I don't really want them in my writing. I don't like, they're just topics that I don't want like to be in my stories. Like I won't get into them, but like so from there it sort of gets tricky to be like, okay, what because like people have different experiences and people have certain experiences that like might be super specific. So like it is sometimes hard to know, like, to have like a foresight for like what could potentially be like triggering content for certain people. Like I know from experience that like after I did my first workshop for Dune, I found for Lemonheart, I found out that like, well, I had like a content warning for cannibalism in the story because there's like a cannibalistic element in Lemonheart that's very prevalent in the story. But I put that in because I was like, that could potentially be triggering, but I don't know. I have no idea like what context that would be triggering for. Like I can't imagine cannibalism as something that like is a very common experience. But I put it in anyway because I was like, I don't know, I'm not sure. But then like there was other stuff that I'm like, I didn't put a content warning in and then like going back to it, I was like, should I have like put a warning in for that? Because that was pretty fucked up. But I'm not sure, and I think when it comes to topics that aren't like super obvious, you like doing some like just Google it. That's pretty much like if you're not sure, Google, like just Google to make sure like that's something that you should put a content warning for. But I think putting content warnings in your stories is a good thing because like the last thing I would want to do would be to make a story that someone has a really bad time with inadvertently because of something that I put in my story that I just wasn't even thinking about.
Yeah. I agree with you. Content warnings, I think, like, if they're dealing with anxiety and depression and PTSD, which are things that a lot of people do experience, like, I think there definitely should be a content warning on that. And, you know, kind of close, like, going back to our own personal bubble for a minute and just kind of talking about ourselves. I know for sure I am going to be including a content warning in Xeno because should things go according to plan, Porter will be experiencing an anxiety attack midway through the story. And that obviously is going to be very triggering for people because, you know, anxiety attacks are very terrifying. And as someone who has gone through anxiety, like as someone who's experienced it, like it certainly wasn't an overnight decision. Like it really does play into Porter's character and how she would be reacting to the situation. But I understand now that if I were to just include all the symptoms leading up to, or all of the things leading up to an anxiety attack and not have given the warning, I feel like that would be like a lot of people would be receiving negatively towards my book, and that's the least that I would want to happen. So I think, yeah, content warnings are definitely a good thing nowadays. But I think more or less for broader things, like getting specifically into like things like cannibalism, I don't personally see how that would apply to a content warning specifically. Like it might be a gross warning.
It could just be hard to know what to content warn for. Like one of the first stories that I wrote, I didn't want to put content warnings in it because I didn't want it to be immediately obvious that it was going to have murder in it, that it was going to have like a mugging and stabbing. But I knew that that could be something that people would get triggered by because like getting mugged would be extremely traumatic. But I was like, I don't want to spoil it, so I don't know what to do. Because it was supposed to be like a normal story, and then all of a sudden this bad things happen, and then it goes from there. And it's like, I don't want to spoil that part of it because that shifts the entire mood of it. So I don't know what to do. And ended up just scrapping the story because it was like, I can't carry on knowing that this could trigger someone, but I can't like warn beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
So just dropped it.
Yeah.
Like, it's difficult.
I think then we can have like one final discussion because I think this one is a really important one, and that is the death of the author. As you know, I'm pretty sure like you guys are familiar with it, or maybe I'm just phrasing it differently, but basically it's like, how do you separate the work from the artist, or like how do you separate the work from the artist? And I think in today's climate, it's definitely a lot harder to do that, because for the art that people put out, the people themselves are kind of shitty. Like, obviously we've had examples with J.K. Rowling being transphobic, but there have been other things, like there are, like, I think maybe that's the biggest one. Are there any ones that like particularly come to mind with you guys, or?
Heck, I don't know.
I mean, we talked about Lovecraft a lot on the Cosmic Horror episode. That's probably the biggest example for me of like where it's been successful, because like Lovecraft, he's very famously was like a massive piece of shit in his life. And I think Death of the Author has definitely applied, because the cosmic horror genre has become a genre that's like fueled mostly by writers who occupy demographics who Lovecraft hated in his life, which is I just think that's pretty cool that like that's happened, that's because it's a cool genre, and were it not for writers like Octavia Butler and like people like John Carpenter, you would probably not have a genre that was like occupied by anyone, because it would just have the reputation of being like just run by this insane maniac who just had like horrific views even for his time. Like that's the thing that I think a lot of people like gloss over when they're like oh, it was in his time. It's like, was it? Because in his time he was even then he was considered like horrifically racist by his peers. He wasn't like he's one of those authors who didn't even, it's Death of the Author very literally applies. His work didn't even become famous until like long after he died. Ironically enough, mostly by the work of a publishing friend of his who, unbeknownst to Lovecraft, was a gay man, which is just a whole other thing to like just dissect. See, it's a situation where like Death of the Author is just like encapsulated. I think it was literally his death that led to his work being taken on by like LGBT people and like becoming this whole other monster.
Yeah.
In a good way.
Yeah.
Saying monster in a good way, to be clear. Totally clear.
Yeah, we got you.
Yeah.
So I think on Death of the Author, it's really hard to kind of, as an author, it's really hard to like separate or like be mindful of like how much of yourself you put into your work, because I think once you do that, it can be really, really, really hard sometimes to accept some of the criticism thrown your way. And I obviously can't speak for you, Gabe, or can't speak for you, Brooke, but I can speak for myself in that after I've poured in so much of my thing, after I've poured in so much of my time and love into my thing, and to suddenly have it critiqued, like it can be difficult really to kind of assess like how much of it makes sense and if it can really like apply it, because then does it still become my book or does it become the people's? And I think I don't know if that's really relating to Death of the Author anymore, but like, where's that balance?
I think it comes back to like, for me at least, it comes back to what I was saying before, that like you don't have to apply all criticism to your writing, but you do have to internalize it. Because I definitely think that like the criticism that I've received on my stories it's definitely influenced my writing, but like whether or not that's like I'm making whole cloth changes or like I'm writing with the knowledge of like how it may come across to certain people, like that's always something that's going to be in the back of my mind with my writing. So I still think as long as you're writing it in a way that you like, then it's your writing. That's what I'll say. But like, if you're writing, if you okay, here's what I'll say. If you're writing to try to like appease to the criticism, like that you preemptively think that you're going to get based on criticism that you've got before, then you're not going to make something that people like. Like that's just inevitable. Like, uh, ultimately, like make something that like you want to make, but like apply the criticism that you've had to sort of improve upon it or make it better. But don't like change it whole. If you change it whole cloth to try to appeal to someone else, then like it's not going to come across as something that like. I mean, there are certain circumstances where it's different, but like most of the time, it's not going to come across as something that feels like it was made by a person. If it'll feel like it was made for like to appeal to a specific taste, and it's not going to feel like it was made for with any personality or anything.
Yeah, it wouldn't have felt like you wrote it.
Yeah, exactly. That's a problem I've had with a lot of like not even just that the guy I was talking about earlier, but with a lot of people whose scripts I critiqued when I was more into movies than books. Um, where I just felt like this was it it wasn't writing to like appeal to what they actually wanted to write. I could tell that. I could totally see that this was like something that they wrote based on what they recognized worked in other movies and like were trying to replicate in their own writing without really making it their own.
Right.
The biggest example that I ever found, like the most prevalent and the weirdest but most specific one, if you're listening to this and you write scripts, like take this to heart. I'm about to give you like the gold standard secret. Um, so there's a thing that I've noticed in a lot of indie scripts that I critiqued that and I gave notes on where so there's a scene in Pulp Fiction where John Travolta and Uma Thurman go to this diner and there's a very long drawn out sequence of where John Travolta tries to order a milkshake and he's like, "Oh, this milkshake is $5. What's this got? It's got pee-pee in it. That's got $5." And like there's a whole sequence on that and there's like this whole intimate moment with the milkshake. It's a whole thing. And what I've noticed is that a lot of people who especially in high school who were like cinema kids, they saw that scene and what they internalized from that was restaurant scene good, me do restaurant scene. And so for every fucking script that I have ever given notes on, there's always an extremely gratuitous, drawn out sequence where a character is in a restaurant and they order something. But what they didn't get was that whole scene isn't interesting because John Travolta's ordering off a fucking menu. It's interesting because of like what the conversations are. But all they seemed to get was I need to have a restaurant scene. So there's and that just became extremely obvious as I was going through those, and I was just like, this isn't like I can tell this isn't a scene you want to actually be in the story because you think it's going to make the story better. You're doing this because you recognize that Tarantino gets praise and you want to get praise, and like don't just write to get praise. Write a story the way that you want it to. Whether or not it gets praise, that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
Maybe you write something that people hate. Who gives a fuck? Write something that you actually want to write. People will like it because there's 7 billion people. You're gonna write a story that someone likes unless you write it specifically to get people to like it, in which case people are going to see through that immediately.
Fair point. Brooke, any advice on giving and receiving criticism to help close off the show?
Be honest but not spiteful. Take it as it is, as not a personal attack, but a helpful suggestion.
I second that. I think for what I can offer, I think Gabe and Brooke have pretty much nailed it on the head with their advice, but I think really what I can offer is when you find something that you know works for you, be open to it changing. Like, whether it changes for the good or for the better, or for bad or for for bad or for good, just, have an open mind on that and be accepting of the fact that there are people out there that want you to succeed and will try to give you whatever advice they can to help make it work. And obviously, you can pay attention to some of the scumbags that might want to fuck you over, but ultimately, like, there is still a lot of help in this industry. And I would hope that when the three of us move into it, that we get that help for us too. 'Cause that'd be nice. But yeah, anything else you guys want to say before we close off?
Writing go burr.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right. Thanks everybody for listening. You can find all of our social media down in the description below, both individually and collectively as the Ink Guild, except for Brooke's. Hers is still a secret. For a final close off, what is one piece of advice that you'd want to give to yourself 5 years from now? And if that doesn't make any sense, I'll start. Hey Dean, 5 years from now, if you're still writing, and whether or not you're still published or not, remember that you've got a good thing going with Xeno, and try to pursue it pretty much until you die. That's all. That's really all I can kind of boil it down to. But like, you've been working hard on Xeno for a while, and personally, I would hate to see it kind of go to waste, no matter what. So like, don't let anyone stop you from it, whether it's a bad publisher or a girlfriend or a boyfriend or whatever. Don't ever stop working on it until it makes it on the shelves. Gabe, how about you? What's advice you want to give Gabe 5 years from now?
Fuck, man. I could give Gabe 5 years ago advice, but Gabe 5 years from now, I'm gonna be like, what? What are numbers? I'll be like 28 5 years from now. Hang on,
Yeah.
That can't be right. Hang on, wait, hang on, wait, that can't be right. Oh God, I'm getting 28 in 5 years. What the fuck?
Oh God, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for you to have an existential crisis.
Hey, dear Gabe, 5 years from now, stop aging, you fuck.
So you're either going to be immortal or dead? Cool.
Yes,
Yes.
those are the options. Gabe, 5 years from now, if Neuralink hasn't come out and you can't put yourself in a robot body, die.
Jesus.
All right, Brooke. Any word of advice you want to offer 25-year-old Brooke?
Sup, bitch? Why the fuck you listening to me? Go write some shit. Look at old prompts, you dumbass. Okay, peace out.
All right. Good night, everybody. I think that's it.
Aggressive negotiations.